right, we are live from Nashville, MAPS Day 3, actually. So we're going to be sharing with you some of the learnings, highlights from today's sessions. I think there were a number of very good sessions today. I really enjoyed the day today. So we have a guest of honor. I'll let him introduce himself in a second. But first of all, my co-host Marieke.
Thank you, Luca. It's fun to be here again, and Bora, it's fun. I can't talk. It's fun to have you here again too.
Yeah, thank you. It's my second time, but I always enjoy being with you guys. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. So, Bora, I think you were there in one of the sessions we would love to cover today.
Mhm.
And as usual, I'm looking at my little notes here. So, the first one we want to cover is around the future of medical education. So what's in the future of medical education?
Yeah. I think that was a great session. I also have some notes because
Yeah.
I actually there were really great questions throughout the session and on polling questions, and I took some notes around from those questions that I want to share as well. So this was all around, because of the COVID, the way that we are engaging is changing, which also has an implication for how we learn and how we educate as well. And it was a bit of a overview of what those changes are and how it's going to really impact how we educate others.
Mhm.
And then the session touched on three main topics. I think one of them was integration of social media. I think the realization of social media is a way of educating others, but we are not really using it at its potential. The other one was around, how do we evolve the way that we are working with professional societies and patient advocacy groups differently? They are great partners, but again, I think in education activities, the way that we partner with them is very limited.
Right.
There's a lot more potential to be able to do that differently. And then third thing is obviously common theme around the entire conference, the adoption of technology and digital and how it really helps us measure better, educate better, personalize better, that entire journey. So those were the three topics that really they touched on. Going back to the social media a little bit, I guess there were two different maybe community that we talked about. I think one of them is more the open communities like
Mhm.
Twitter, Instagram,
Right.
TikTok. The other one was a lot more closed ones. I think Docsmith is Sarmo. It looked like, I think, first of all, the polling question, which was interesting, 60% of the audience believes that social media is a friend versus a foe, which was great,
Mhm.
right? And almost like 65% of everyone in the room used Twitter as an external education tool, which was also relatively surprising to me because when I looked at Twitter, I didn't see as many. Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And then also generally, 86% use the general networks versus the dedicated ones, which is, I feel that there is an opportunity to do more with Docsmith and Sorma
Mhm,
because
mhm.
this is where the physicians go. I think we should also engage them where they are. So those were a couple of the interesting things that I've gathered from the social media piece. I think from the collaboration part for the professional societies and patient advocacy groups, they highlighted a nice example, which is called Manage PD, which is a tool to help decision makers better decisions about management of Parkinson's disease. And they in this building that tool, they work with Parkinson's Foundation, Cure Parkinson's, and some of the experts around the world, which I think was a good example of how that this can be done differently. I think they developed two applications, one for physicians and one for patients. When we talk about the AI, obviously, we talked about large language models and ChatGPT, and that was an interesting polling questions around how many of the audience actually using ChatGPT for personal use, which was 50%, which is, again, I think a pleasant surprise. And we talked about, the application of AI in general for external education. I think we talked about assessing and predicting learning needs, automating assessment and evaluations, personalizing learning experiences and measurement of outcomes, and doing it rapidly. So those were the main highlights from the session. I think it was well attended. And also some reflection is that, there is still room for innovation there. I think that there are things that we can do. We can partner with others to do differently.
Right. So now I have a question for both of you. Maybe I'll start with you, Marieke. But the question is around this last point, the generative AI in the space of external education. How far you think we are now from an actual technology like this one becoming mainstream in medical affairs? How much work there is still that needs to be done before it becomes a real mainstream thing?
So I think it's going to be sooner than we think. That's so if 50% of the audience was already using Chat GPT, that means it people, think it has value to a certain extent. And so I think because it's so adaptive, it really reads what you're doing and it adapts and it continues with that. It's going to pick up sooner than we think, and I'm not sure we're prepared for that, because while it is very good at adapting, it's also making mistakes, and most of the information that it's using so far, to my understanding, is from prior to 2021, so it's not that accurate. So you have general great answers, but that doesn't mean it's recent.
Right.
And if things have changed. So I hope it's going to be here sooner. It will make our lives easier, but we still have a road to go. What do you think?
I think that just one reflection is I think ChatGPT is having a bit of a creating an iPhone moment for all of these. I think I remember a number of years ago, there was a very famous video on YouTube where Google is using a similar tool to actually make a reservation at a Chinese restaurant. And the ChatGPT-like application is actually talking to a real person, making a very successful reservation. And there's some language barriers and other issues in that conversation, which was, to me, is at the time, it's an incredible technology. But we are still right now talking about, most of us, just honestly, we are just realizing this does exist and this is an application. To me, that tells me that I think we are a little behind, as we usually are in pharma, right, from the technology perspective. But I think it's going to be faster. I agree with you, right? The adoption is going to be faster. But I also feel, and just listening to people and some of the experimentation early, I guess we're going to hit that compliance and legal frameworks and the rules again a bit of, and we need to kind of think about how to really adopt some of these practices and do it in an appropriate way. I think that's going to be the key.
But where I think the adoption may actually be faster is in one of the probably last points you made around understanding unmet educational needs. And if you think of the data sets that we may already have in house in most of like big pharma companies, big and small, I would say, pharma companies, meaning like all the reports from the CMEs we do, right? You do have a good starting point there to mine what further educational needs you have. And if you combine that with insights from the MSLs, maybe advisory boards, so you do have a good, set of data that you can leverage to train the algorithm. And I can totally see generative AI being able to help to identify those unmet needs, unmet educational needs that are more important for, cross-referencing all these different data sources. So that's really a good one. Maybe we can move to the next session. I was actually thinking maybe we should disclose how we choose the 3 sessions we are covering, or maybe not. We just leave it. We just
Do you
leave
want
it
to
there.
save it till the last one while we're covering the last
Pick
one?
the best one.
The best
Right.
sessions. The best sessions. So the second one I'd love to cover is a session we had today on using scientific awareness to measure impact of medical affairs. So I think measuring impact of medical affairs has been a topic for the last 2 decades at least, probably more than that. How do we truly measure? How do we quantify the impact of medical affairs organizations? And it's always been a point of discussion, right? What are the right KPIs? Are the KPIs the same for all medical affairs organizations, or each one of us should have their own set of criteria to measure impact? Definitely measuring scientific awareness or share of scientific voice, as we tend to say these days, is definitely a very powerful tool. Is it the one kind of silver bullet that you just measure that thing and you're just fine? Probably not. But if you combine that with some of the other measures that we have been tracking, like in the field and publications and other things, it can be a nice addition to a set of KPIs that we have been already tracking for some time. So in particular, the share of scientific voice, I think it's a combination of awareness through social media, so you can do some social listening and understand what's the level of awareness on one particular product or biomarker or disease state. But then you combine that with other things like how many publications, how many abstracts, how many podium time, right? You have a bunch of other data points that you can combine into the share of scientific voice. So this is the kind of 2 minutes summary of the session. That was actually more of a workshop. So each table had obviously then a conversation and discussion around this. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and maybe this time I'll start with you, Bora.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I was not in the session, unfortunately, but I thank you for the summary. I like how you describe it as this is a great measurement. However, alone probably doesn't really tell you the whole story. I think I like that, just thinking around what is the value story that we would really want to tell, and then really this is going to be a critical part of it. I also, maybe a reflection, maybe I'll love to hear your thoughts. I still feel that we are measuring things that we think that we can measure rather than the things that we should measure eventually. I think that I really want people to push themselves to say, okay, yes, scientific awareness, scientific share of voice, or I don't know, maybe customer experience. These are things that we can measure, and we are measuring it. But if you go back to your organization and tell these pieces to someone, what does that really even mean, right? I think they're going to always come back to you and say, yeah, so what, right? So great scientific awareness, so what? How is this really impacting the change in clinical practice? What are the physicians doing as a result? How are the patient outcomes changing, right? I think I really would love industry to go more like the outcomes, more of the the care gaps, and how we are actually addressing those gaps, and how we are moving the needle, and where it actually matters the most for patients, right? I think we are still, I feel, a little more, okay, I can measure this, let me measure it.
Right.
But that's kind of my reflection. I don't know, how do you feel, Marieke?
That's well, I want to add on that, because that was going to be my question to both of you. What you measure is what you get. That's you're always going to have some sort of bias in what you measure and the outcomes that come with that. But you want to measure things so you can appropriate resources properly. So like what you said, you have to measure what actually makes impact and what you can do something with it. So how does that fit within that perspective? Are you really getting out of it, not just like, showing, this is what we do, but this is, if we reallocate resources this way, this is how we're going to impact, our entire plan, our where we're going.
Yeah, but I think it looks like, Luca and Marieke, I think this question is going to come up again next year in MAPS. So I don't think that anyone, actually finally put their stamp on it and solve it. But I think with the availability of better data, more connected data, understanding of how the healthcare is delivered, how it impacts outcomes, I think it's going to go that direction, right? I think then you can tell a very compelling story internally as well, with your broader leadership, the actual impact, and externally too, right? I think you can go to an institution and say, hey, here's how we are helping your patients, your physicians, delivering much better care.
Right.
And here's the impact. And thinking about other partnership opportunities, it's going to open doors and build trust.
So I think the reason why we have been talking about this for decades, and to your point, most likely we're going to be talking about this next year and the one after, is that, to your point, what really matters and what we should really be measuring is how are we moving the needle for when it comes to patient outcomes, right?
Yep.
However, and that's where I think we are kind of stuck a little bit, is that if you think of different therapeutic areas, even within oncology, outcomes are different depending on the particular tumor type, or if it's another therapeutic area, particular disease, right? So outcomes are different, almost like case by case, right? If you work on a certain product, most likely, even if it's within oncology, most likely outcomes are different from the outcomes that your colleague in the therapeutic area sitting next to you is interested in and wants to measure. So what I'm trying to say is that, in my view, the reason why we are not able to say, okay, this is the 5, 6, 10, whatever KPIs that we all in medical affairs should be measuring to tell what good looks like and to tell how good we are as a medical affairs organization. That's the problem, right? I don't think there is such a thing of a standard set of rule or criteria or KPIs that we all can measure to say, okay, we are a good organization. That's why I think it's so important that each and every one of us thinks of what matters for my particular product, for my particular tumor type, for my particular TA, and identify my own set of KPIs. Obviously, I validate that with leadership, right? To your point, I validate that with the key stakeholders, but then that becomes my set of criteria that and KPIs that I'm going to be measuring over time. Yeah. So again, I just feel that the reason we have been stuck is because we have been trying to find that kind of easy way out, whereas probably there isn't. And again, it's really just going to be on a case by case basis. Yeah. What do you guys think?
No, I agree, and I really like it. I think also one thing that we did not mention, whatever you measure needs to be connected to what you are supposed to be doing to start with, right? Your strategy, essentially. And if you think about every organization, I mean, you guys don't have the same strategy. You can't, because you have different products and different approaches to business. I think from that perspective, that tailoring is really important. I think that then what you really need to do is also go back and tell a good story about, again, right? Here's why you pick these metrics. Here's how it's supporting, or how it's helping you understand, how you are driving the strategy on the ground, right? And how you're also obviously helping the patients and the physicians. I think you're right. I think there's no, here's the 5 metrics that everyone has to measure and it will tell the story. I think there's variations of that. It's actually the reality.
Right. I mean, I think there is a reason why historically we have been really trying to find that set group of KPI. I mean, if you think of commercial organizations, it's a much more standardized and codified. You measure market share, you measure revenues, you have things that pretty much you can measure across many different products. So I think just we've been trying to emulate that same, or to borrow that same thinking within medical affairs, but it's just not that simple, I guess.
And also maybe if you can imagine the future, which is what we are going, right? If a healthcare system decides whether to give access or reimburse your product based on the impact that product is creating, right? Which is the patient outcome. If that feature happens, and pieces of it happening today, then I think commercial is going to look at metrics like we are talking about, right? I think because
I love it.
Their success of how many molecules or how many pills that they are selling doesn't really matter. I think because it still matters for their financial analysis, but it doesn't really matter because they need to be improving the patient outcomes. I think there's going to be a convergence in the future, but obviously we're not there yet.
Awesome. All right, let's switch to the third session.
And the most exciting one.
Yeah, the most
The
exciting.
best one.
And that was your session, Marieke, about using the medical affairs leadership competency model to develop employees in medical affairs. So give us
Right.
your
The-
download.
The download. So it was really about crowdsourcing what's different capabilities, skills, and competencies people in medical affairs think are important to develop over time. And so we're basing our model on the Department of Labor model, which has been tested in many ways. It's verified, it's validated. They know, which are essential foundational skills that you need and what do you need specifically for your industry, for your department, for your job, and then leadership skills. And so we really crowdsourced, what is important industry-wide. What do you need as a capability? So when you are changing from, say, clinical to medical affairs to commercial, so you can switch in between, what are essential industry competencies that you need? So we had a great discussion about that afterwards too. Then we went specifically into, what are capabilities that an MSL needs? And so you want to have foundational skills, you want to have intermediate skills, and you want to have advanced skills. And how do you help an MSL go from, one to the next level? And then lastly, we talked about the different leadership skills and how you, within planning and strategy, what do you need within leadership, people management, and project management? And then we integrated everything together. And you can create career ladders within medical affairs towards leadership. And so we got all the information, a big stack of papers over there. And what's going to happen, we have one more session tomorrow. We're going to integrate it, develop it together with the Department of Labor, and we're going to publish it.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
That's so that was super exciting. The advantages of having a competency model and is for the employee, they know what their job is. There's no more, ambiguity about what you need to do, whether you're an MSL or whether you're in the home office. It's much better. So for an employer, on the other hand, you can create your job descriptions much more specific. When you read job descriptions at the moment, a lot looks, kind of familiar, and titles, it doesn't really, match with what you're actually doing. Second, both for the employee and employer, you now have the opportunity to create a development plan. You assess by yourself, and you have your manager assess where are areas of opportunities, and you can, create those plans together. And so that means career advancements for an employee, and for the employer, it means you have succession planning. And that's often a very overseen, people leave. What happens then?
Right.
So it's much better and cheaper for a company, so to speak, to have their people grow within.
So can you give us a sneak peek into, what are the one or two capabilities that, raise to the top in terms of, people in the room being vocal about, we really need ABC. These are our top priorities. Was there anything like that?
Well, emotional intelligence came very, very high.
Very good one.
That's both within leadership, people management, but also, in industry specific and medical affairs. It came up.
That's a good one.
Repeatedly. Coaching in leadership came up very much. How do you coach your employees to go to a higher level? And be satisfied with their job. For medical affairs specifically, we had a cross-functional collaboration often, and scientific acumen.
How about business acumen, right? That's usually something that comes up often, right? I mean, scientific acumen in medical affairs is almost a given, right? If you are in medical affairs and you don't have the scientific acumen, we have a problem. How about business acumen? Was that part of the discussion, or maybe not?
No, actually, it was only mentioned once.
Okay.
in leadership.
That's interesting.
So
But I think based on some of the research that we have done, if you ask this question to others in the organization,
that's
they
a good
will
point.
it will
Yeah.
come at the top, right? I think if you are asking, hey, what do you think that your medical affairs organization needs to improve upon? I think they typically their understanding of how the business is run quite a bit. I think it's a bit of how the medical organizations are still unfortunately is being perceived by the others within the bigger pharma, right? The commercial primarily, but others. I think that's interesting, right? I think it's an interesting finding. But I think I wonder, there's a version of this can also be done, and maybe similar set of questions can be asked to people
Partners.
outside of medical affairs to see, what they think that medical affairs should be doing. An idea.
I'd love to do that, but this already is.
Of course, I know.
More work than I had anticipated, so I'd like to keep it as small as possible.
No, yeah.
But,
One other thing that I think, I don't know, maybe in my profession, we do a lot of feedback. We do give a lot of feedback to people. And this is almost an ongoing basis. Like I get feedback every day and I give feedback every day. This is how we think that we improve, right? I don't see that as much outside, like in pharma, in medical affairs. I wonder, I think this is the way that actually the competency model, I think can be very helpful, is that, you can actually, just take the emotion out of the feedback and based on your feedback on that competency model and say, hey, look, here are the things that you are doing really well and you're ahead of the curve, right? Almost getting into this next level. And here are the things that actually, you should be doing differently. And here is why. And look at the competency model. The competency model can tell the people what good looks like and how to improve. I think there's a utility to it. I'm glad that you are spending time and effort into it.
Yeah, more time than I initially thought I was going to, but you're right. Feedback is very important, and now you have it aligned. In every session, I always ask at the end, what went well in our session, what do we need to continue, and what can we do better next time. But that's also a generational difference.
Could be.
Because with older generations, it's harder when you're working with younger, especially with Gen Zs. They love feedback and they want it sooner. They want it immediate after, and older generations are more like, the first time that I say, what went well in our session and what can we do better, they're like, oh, I don't know. Eventually, they'll come up with something every session. So, but then that's how I normalize feedback. I think feedback is extremely important.
Yeah, I agree.
I had no idea that Gen Z loves feedback. I learned something new.
That's well, yeah.
I thought that they love giving feedback.
Well, okay, yeah. No, I have. No, they love feedback.
That's great.
Okay.
Especially Gen A, the one coming after, they love feedback. Giving feedback, receiving feedback is a little harder for them.
Giving feedback.
They have a lot of opinions. Yes.
All right.
But I think it's a good thing.
Right. That's
Yeah. So I think we are at time, but it was really good chat. I love kind of dissecting some of these sessions with you guys. And this actually also concludes our coverage for MAPS. I think tomorrow we are all gonna be heading home, but that doesn't mean that we may potentially in the next couple of weeks also do a bit more discussions with some of the people that were here, and maybe pick someone else's brain on some of the topics we already covered, or maybe cover some other things. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I think hopefully it's been a way to get some of the content from MAPS without necessarily being in Nashville. So thank you so much.
That's thank you. It was wonderful as always.
Thanks for having me. Yeah,
It's again,
it's a pleasure always.
Good. Okay, here we go.